Thursday morning. It's our final Yechezkel learning until the fall, until after the Chagim. Just remind folks to keep your eyes out for a summer learning session, which will probably be Thursday mornings with the rabbinic team on modern Jewish thinkers. I know Rabbanit Bracha already picked out 2 sessions, and I hope to select 1 or 2, perhaps Rabbi Sarah as well. We usually have a summer learning 3 evenings mini-mester with 1 or 2 turns. So that should be coming down the pike as well in July or August. So we're just getting things organized for the summer, and also, of course, looking ahead to the fall. And of course, our prayers are with Medinat Yisrael and all in harm's way. We have a shul member who has her mechutanim, the parents of her daughter's husband, live in Tehran. The Jewish community in Tehran, as you can imagine, is incredibly beleaguered and fearful right now for their lives, because of the attacks that are taking place, but also because they fear reprisal as Jews associated with the state of Israel. And there are 15,000 Iranian Jews. They kept up their institutions and their lives, and so we have them in our prayers as well.
There's
And
a whole community in Los Angeles.
Yep, there's a large Persian, Iranian communities in LA and in other places in the United States that are, have relatives there. We have shul members with other relatives in Iran. So there are lots of places to direct our prayers and our care and our concern. Let me also make a couple other public service announcements. A reminder that early voting is underway for our local primaries. I would consider this a high stakes election, with a wide range of candidates, with a very wide range of views on issues that are important to us, not just anti-Semitism and Israel, but all the issues of domestic, social justice and welfare for our brothers and sisters of the Bronx and New York that need our attention. So please be sure to vote early if you can, if not, to vote on election day. If people have questions, I'll field them afterwards. Let's get through our learning, but I'm happy to stick around after the recording and the class ends to answer questions about ranked choice voting. I think I do understand how it works and how to utilize it and how not to utilize it, or how not to misutilize it. So I'm happy to answer questions about that. But please really do exercise your democratic prerogative to vote. Your primaries are notoriously poorly attended, and so your vote counts extra in that sense. So please be sure to vote. And also I want to make mention, we don't mention it that often, but this class is, of course, named the Bernice and Arthur Schwartz Zichronam Livracha Memorial Tanach class, and just always have Bernice and Arthur, as well as the many of our fellow learners who've learned with us over my almost 17 years, and who've left this world, are always in our hearts and in our memories as a year of learning comes to a close. Yes, 17 years, but you're the same age as when I started, so don't worry. So Ezekiel chapter 10, as we've said a number of times, chapters 8 through 11 are a literary unit. We'll leave just before we complete that literary unit. What we've seen is in chapter 8, we saw a series of idolatrous visions. Ezekiel has been taken on only in a vision. His body remains in Babylon, but his spirit has been ported over. His internal vision has been ported over to Jerusalem, to the temple, and he's seen a vision of various idolatrous practices by all different groups in all different ways to different gods in different places around the temple environs taking place. That was chapter 8. And chapter 9, he saw a vision of destruction in which someone was charged to mark the foreheads, pardon me, to mark the foreheads of those who protested the idolatry. That would be a mark of protection, and then to pass through Jerusalem and to kill the others. While that was happening, Ezekiel asked God, "Are you really going to annihilate all of Israel?" And God said, "Their sins are very great, but we don't know from that if the God's meaning was, and therefore no one is going to get the mark and be spared." Obviously, we assume that's not the case, but rather that indeed everyone without the mark in God's eyes was deserving of death, and therefore that punishment was meted out. And the end of chapter 9, the man clothed in linen with the writing case at his waist, who marked the foreheads of those who were to be protected, came back and said, "I did as you have commanded me." And that was sort of the ironic end. All God wants is for us to do as God commands when it comes to God's instructions of keeping the commandments and worshiping God. In the absence of that, God has to take a messenger to do as God commands to carry out the punishment. It's a harsh punishment. We spent plenty of time on that, and it continues to be something to wrestle with. In chapter 10, we're going to see a chapter which bears a great resemblance to chapter 1. That is, it seems to be a reprise of Ezekiel's vision of the divine throne and chariot and divine presence. We've got cherubs, we've got the wheels inside the wheels, and we have this nebulous, numinous vision of something heavenly and otherworldly. We'll read it through. We'll look at a couple of details. We'll see the prominence of the Kruvim, the cherubs, and we'll also take note that this accompanies, and chapter 11, which we'll return to in the fall, really has this in full force. What we're seeing as we see this divine vision is a vision of the divine which is actually departing from the temple. And we have the Midrash builds, and we may have a chance to look briefly at that Midrash, a sort of a collection of verses which depict God's stepwise departure from the temple. That kind of began a little bit in chapter 9, continues in chapter 10, and then in full force in chapter 11. So while it's a vision of grandeur, that grandeur is marred by the recognition that the God that we're beholding is somehow taking God's leave of the temple. So that's by way of things to look out for as we go. I realize we don't have books on our table, so bear with me a moment. I'll be right back. For those in person to be able to follow along.
I wasn't gonna say anything. We're gonna have to really pay more attention to the reading, which I find very difficult. Why? To do. Because unless I can look back and forth. Yeah.
Or rather, if you don't see something, say something.
Yeah.
I'll give a page announcement in a moment. Ezekiel chapter 10, Yechezkel Perek Yud is going to place us in the Brown JPS Tanachs. We're on page 1170, 1170. And for those following along on Zoom, we will have the text in front of us here on the screen. Beginning with the beginning of chapter 10. And Ruby, do you want to read for us?
Okay. I looked, and on the expanse over the heads of the cherubs, there was something like a sapphire stone. An appearance resembling a throne could be seen over them. He spoke to the man clothed in linen and said, "Step inside the wheelwork under the cherubs and fill your hands with glowing coals from among the cherubs and scatter them over the city." And he went in as I looked on. Now the cherubs were standing on the south side of the house when the man entered, and the cloud filled the inner court. But when the presence of the Lord moved from the cherubs to the platform of the house was filled with a cloud, and the court was filled with the radiance of the presence of the Lord. The sound of the cherubs' wings could be heard as far as the outer court, like the voice of El Shaddai when he speaks. When he commanded the man dressed in linen, "Take fire among the cherubs within the wheelwork," he went in and stood beside a wheel. And a cherub stood out his hand among the cherubs, the fire that was among the cherubs. He took some and put it into the hand of him who was clothed in linen, who took it and went out. The cherubs appeared to have the form of a man's hand under their wings. I could see that there were 4 wheels inside the cherubs, 1 wheel beside each of the cherubs. As for the appearance of the wheels, they gleamed like the beryl stone. In appearance, the 4 had the same form as if there were 2 wheels cutting through each other. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its 4 quarters. They did not veer as they moved. The cherubs moved in the direction in which one of the heads faced without turning as they moved. Their entire bodies, back, hands, and wings, and the wheels of the 4 of them, were covered all over with eyes. It was these wheels that I heard called the wheel work. Each one had 4 faces. One was a cherub's face, the second a human face, the third a lion's face, and the 4th an eagle's face. The cherubs ascended. Those were the creatures that I'd seen by the Chabar Canal.
Okay, hold on. That's a good pausing point. And Elaine, do you want to finish up for us from verse 16?
When the cherubs went, the wheels went beside them. And when the cherubs lifted their wings to ascend from the earth, the wheels did not roll away from their side. When those stood still, these stood still. And when those ascended, these ascended with them. For the spirit of the creature was in them. Then the presence of the Lord left the platform of the house and stopped above the cherubs. And I saw the cherubs lift their wings and rise from the earth with the wheels beside them as they departed. And they stopped at the entrance of the eastern gate of the house of the Lord with the presence of the God of Israel above them. They were the same creatures that I had seen below the God of Israel at the Chebar Canal. So now I knew they were cherubs. Each one had 4 faces, and each had 4 wings with the form of human hands under the wings. As for the form of their faces, they were the very faces that I had seen by their Chebar Canal, their appearance and their features, and each could move in the direction of any of its faces.
Okay.
That's too much.
So, this is kind of a little bit like a setup chapter very much in the sense that chapter 1 of Ezekiel was. Chapter 1 of Ezekiel was a vision of this chariot and the cherubs and the wheels and the wings and the eyes and the stone-like radiant gleaming vision, and all of that led up to at the end of chapter 1. And I heard the voice of someone speaking. And then chapter 2 contains the beginning of God's message. And here too in chapter 10, there's a little bit of action, so to speak, but it's mostly Ezekiel again sort of acclimating to what he's seeing. And it's only in chapter 11 that a proper, message and prophecy comes from God. And a lot more takes place in chapter 11. So the two are meant to be read together, but it's okay. We do it 1 chapter at a time, and there's still plenty to unpack from the vision of Ezekiel. The comparisons to Ezekiel chapter 1 are very significant, all the way down to the, presence of fire in chapter 1, verse 13. The appearance of the creatures had something kegachale eish bo'arot, something that looked like burning coals of fire. We had lots of other description about the 4 faces, the wheels, how they moved. One of the noteworthy differences between the two, when we compare and we notice small differences and we wonder about their significance, is that in Ezekiel 1, chapter 10, we see the 4 kind of legs, or so to speak, each of which had 4 faces. In chapter 1, verse 10, we're told that the 4 faces were a human face, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. In chapter 10, verse 14, there are 4 faces: the face of a cherub, the face of a human, the face of a lion, and the face of an eagle. So we swapped out the ox for a cherub. And the rabbis offer a beautiful interpretation. They say the ox is reminiscent of the golden calf. And when Ezekiel saw the divine chariot with its 4 corners, and each of the 4 corners having 4 faces, and one of the 4 faces being an ox, he said to God, it's so unpleasant to be reminded of the sin of the golden calf when I see the ox on the chariot. Could you swap it out for something better? And God replaces it with a cherub. So that's a rabbinic interpretation, attempting to make sense of this discrepancy between the visions. Why would one of the visions be so similar, with the same wheels and the same structure and the same eyes and the same 4 corners with the same 4 faces? It's just that in chapter 1, the faces are a lion, an eagle, an ox, and a human. And in chapter 10, it's a lion, an eagle, a cherub, and a human. So the rabbis offer this interpretation. We can leave it to any of a variety of other reasons why there might be this discrepancy. Certainly the theme of chapter 10 is much more the cherubs. Maybe that has to do with the fact that cherubs are winged creatures. Eagles also are, but cherubs are winged creatures. And the theme of this chapter much more is actually the departure. And so kind of taking flight is more central. The movement is more central to this chapter. So the cherubs are kind of, again, many ways we might interpret this. Maybe it's just 2 different versions. Maybe one is corrupted from the other. But we might imagine that in this chapter, the cherubs are emphasized because they're winged creatures. And in this chapter, we're beholding not a static vision like Ezekiel saw in chapter 1, but a vision of a departure that's happening in chapter 10. And so we want more of a focus on winged creatures. Otherwise, you're welcome on your own to look at chapter 1 and 10 side by side and see the many parallels between them. I want to point out just a few other little details. So just going back up to the beginning of the chapter, I looked, right? We have again this, the opening is the vision, va'er'eh. It's a very sensory chapter. We'll see the sense of hearing come up as well. There's no explicit mention of the sense of smell, but we could imagine with glowing coals, there would have been the smell of smoke or of burning that was present. First thing we notice in verse 1 of chapter 10 is that Ezekiel sees El Harakia, looks up to the expanse, the firmament that's over the heads of the Keruvim. And the firmament over their heads is Even Sapir, something like a sapphire stone, and an appearance resembling a throne could be seen over them. So if we get our kind of vertical sense here, Ezekiel's looking up. He sees above the heads of the cherubs, and the cherubs seem to be at the foot of something. Over the head of the cherubs is the sky, and the sky is something sapphire-like with a throne on top. So you got cherubs, sky, sapphire, and throne. If we turn to Exodus, Parashat Mishpatim, my dad's bar mitzvah parsha, towards the end, we have a second account of the revelation at Sinai. We have that revelation at Sinai in Parashat Yitro, and then a parsha later, after a series of civil laws and tort laws, we get a second account of the revelation. It's in chapter 24. God tells Moshe, this is Exodus chapter 24, with Aaron, Nadab, and Avihu, and 70 elders, come up on the mountain. Then Moshe is going to go further up, and the other people are going to stay the rest of the way down. Moshe goes up onto the mountain. He designates Israelites to offer offerings. He reads aloud from the book of the covenant. He takes blood and dashes it on the people. Then in verse 9, it says, Moshe and Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders ascended. Vayir'u et Elohei Yisrael. They saw the God of Israel. Now, Moses was told a number of chapters later, no person can see me and live. So who knows what it means? They saw a vision. They saw a vision of the God of Israel. V'tachat raglav, under God's feet, kema'aseh livnat hasapir, was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, sapir. That's exactly what we have in chapter 10, verse 1. Ke'even sapir, something appearing like a sapphire stone. Uche'etzem hashamayim latohar, like the very sky for purity. So what Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and the 70 elders see is God. Beneath God's feet is a pavement of sapphire like the sky. It kind of matches, looking from bottom to top, what Ezekiel sees. Ezekiel sees the cherubs, then something sapphire sky-like, and then the throne over it. Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, see God's throne. They see God. Underneath God, something sapphire-like, which is like the sky, and then the cherubs underneath it. So the cherubs are at the base of the throne, and the throne sits on the sky, and the sky is sapphire-like. So both the Exodus account and the Ezekiel account really have this vision somewhat in common. We've talked about comparisons between Moshe and Yeshayahu, between Moshe and Yirmiyahu. Here we can sort of create a connection, in a sense, between Moshe and Yechezkel as well. Then we come back in verse 2 to the man clothed in linen. That's the man who had, come back from putting the marks of protection on the protesters against idolatry around Jerusalem. And we don't know who the speaker is, but we imagine it must be the voice of God, most likely. Speaks in verse 2 and says, step into the wheelwork under the cherub. So it's like, you almost imagine a body shop. It's got that lift that lifts up the car, and you can kind of look from underneath. So it's like, go underneath the vision of the chariot and fill your hands with glowing coals from among the cherubs and scatter them over the city. Okay, so somehow here, the man who put the mark of protection on people is now taking glowing coals and scattering them around the city. It sounds almost like he's setting fire to Jerusalem, right? That this is the next stage of the destruction of the temple. We know the temple was burned by fire. Of course, that fire was set by, the Babylonians who laid siege to the city and destroyed it. But here's a kind of a flip version of the story in which the fire actually, in a sense, is started by this messenger of God who's carrying out the destruction. Obviously, as fiery missiles fall down around Israel, without connection to questions of why it's happening, the vision certainly feels current in a different kind of way. The language here of taking melo chafnecha gachale eshin, verse 2, filling your hands with glowing coals, and the idea. Sorry, that's my phone. Hold on a moment, just disable it. The hands filled with glowing coals, and remember that Ezekiel is in the vision, is in the temple at this moment, reminds us, and the presence of God reminds us very much of another important chapter in the Bible, Leviticus chapter 16, Vayikra Tet Zayin. That has the Yom Kippur service described. And the heart of the Yom Kippur service is the incense offering, which is done in the Holy of Holies. And it's done by placing the handfuls of finely ground incense, basically on top of the coals, and that creates this smoke effect. And in chapter 16, verse 12, we're told, take meloha machta, gachale eish, and melo chofnav ketoret samim, almost all the same language for filling up the fire pan, filling up the hands, and the coals. The only thing we're missing is the incense. Sorry, hold on one moment. I just had brought my phone in to let it charge, but I need to quiet it down.
Is it charge thing there?
Yeah, I put one. I put one.
Good to know.
Sorry about that. We should hopefully not be interrupted again. Okay, so yeah, so just to appreciate, the parallelism here between the incense, coals, and handful being offered in the Holy of Holies once a year, which as a source of atonement, and here it seems to be the handfuls of glowing coals from the cherubs. Remember, the cherubs also occupy the top of the ark in the Holy of Holies. So it's same sculpture, same imagery, same items, but instead of being a source of atonement, it seems that they are now a source of destruction. We continue to have kind of now in verses 3 and 4 the beginning of the movement of God's presence from the cherubs. So that's right on the on the ark to the platform of the house, kind of further out. And as God moves, the cloud and the radiance moves with God, and we hear in verse 5 the sound of the wings, like the voice of El Shaddai when God speaks. Kind of amazing. Shaddai is one of the names of God which is associated with great power. Obviously, God's different names emphasize different attributes. So a voice which could be heard at a great distance. And then what's that?
I thought Shaddai was negative.
I don't think it has a negative. I'm not aware of a negative connotation for Shaddai. And then, God further commands the man dressed in linen to go take that fire. The cherub stretches out their hand and places the coals in the hand of the man who took it and went out. So that's he's dispatched now on his second mission after the mission of protective marks. Now he's scattering coals around the city. Again, it seems like setting fire to the city. Maybe a different way of thinking about it is as God's presence is going to depart. These are sort of like stations, mile markers, smoke signs, smoke signals for God's departure. Maybe it doesn't have to be thought of as a symbol of destruction. And now Ezekiel somehow is able, it's almost, you can imagine when he sort of says again here in verse 9, Va'er'eh, I could see. And then a little bit later, he sort of says in verse 13, this is what I heard. As the descriptions continue, almost get the sense that it's like eyes, when you're looking in the darkness and it takes time for your eyes to get used to the dark. Here it's the opposite. It's almost a blinding light, and it's taking his eyes time to get used to the light. So I like the translation in verse 9 of Va'er'eh as I could see. It's almost as though he's slowly being able to take in the details of these blindingly bright visions. And we get more of that description, how they move, what they look like, their bodies covered all over with eyes, understanding now that the ofanim are what's being referred to as the wheelwork. We get the four faces that we spoke about earlier. Then verse 15, Vayeromu hakruvim, the kruvim, almost as though were brought upwards. They were uplifted. And these were the creatures that I had seen by the Kabar Canal. Now he makes explicit the connection between this vision in chapter 10 and his vision in chapter 1. And they moved together without, falling away, the different parts. Again, very similar language to chapter 1. And then verse 18, Vayetze kevod Adonai me'al hamiftan, vayamod ala kruvim. It looks almost like a brief backtracking. God's presence, remember in verse 4, the presence of God moved from the cherubs to the platform. Now, in verse 18, it left the platform and stopped by the cherubs. Doesn't mean it came back to rest. It was almost like you could imagine the parting for God was painful. So God left, and then God came back for a moment, back kind of for like a last hug, a last moment of togetherness. And then the cherubs lift off. They stop at the entrance of the eastern gate with the presence of God above them. It's again, Ezekiel recognizes them, again describes their four faces, and acknowledges that these were the ones that he had seen. Like it maybe a reading of why he keeps saying like, this is what I saw before at the Kavar Canal might be a way of sort of saying, was it really that God that I saw before who actually is leaving? Yes, it was the same chariot, it was the same throne. It's just that now it's actually departing from the temple. Again, chapter 11 gets into much more of the journeys outward, but I think I've said plenty, and I'll pause here for questions or comments or reactions. Elaine? Yep, we'll start with you, Elaine.
Oh yeah. I was just wondering why the man in linen doesn't have his writing case in this chapter.
Yeah, so interesting. Maybe that was only needed for marking the marks, and therefore maybe he put it
Oh
down
yeah,
aside,
that's
or
right.
because it was not part of this second mission. It was put away. But you're absolutely right to notice it. It seemed central to his description in the previous chapter. Now it's absent, maybe because it was a tool for his first mission, and now he's finished with it. Could be.
Right.
Could be. Good question. Estelle?
Is Ezekiel really seeing this?
Ah, is Ezekiel really seeing it? He's seeing it in a vision. So to be sure, the text makes clear his body is still in Babylonia. So it's very, very vivid, but he's not even in Israel, in Jerusalem at the temple looking at it. That's in the vision he's being transported there. To me, this feels very reminiscent of a dream, right? It's you're lying in your bed and you feel that you're in a completely different place. You can recognize the setting and the surroundings, and you see the things that are happening. Yeah.
But what does he hope to accomplish with this dream? I mean, what is it supposed to mean to him? That's what I don't get.
Yeah.
He sees this, but so?
Hold that so until September, or maybe October or November, as the case may be, when we get back to what God's message is in chapter 11, right? The vision, but it's an important point. The vision in and of itself, as profound, mystical, magical, spiritual as it is not an ends unto itself. It's a means to what it is that God wants to communicate to him. So feels a little unsatisfying to stop here because, what's the point of what he saw? But the point of what he saw is to then hear what he saw says. Yes, Ellen.
This is gonna sound really silly, but it's almost comparable to people who take like magic mushrooms or something.
Yes.
And their reason
Yeah.
for doing that, though, not me, but but I do have a friend who does. And they're trying to find out about themselves somehow.
Yes.
And so they go on these bizarre
Trips.
psychological, right? Psychedelic is the word I'm looking for. Psychedelic trips to find out the meaning of life, they say.
Yes.
And that's what this is.
Yeah.
Which is why I have a lot of problems with it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's just a trip on magic mushrooms.
Yeah. Yes. It feels like that. It feels trippy. It feels, but whatever we feel about it, it seems like something is learned, is uncovered, is experienced, and whether the psychedelics actually provide access to an inner world that one can't access in another way, that I don't know. But it does, that I think you're right to sort of actually create this connection. The trip is supposed to take you somewhere, and it's supposed to take you to some understanding, and that's what we haven't gotten to yet. Yes, inward. Yes, I think that's a good point. Yeah. From our Zoomers, happy to hear any comments.
Well, it seems like God is leaving the temple. The Jewish people don't deserve the temple anymore.
Yes, for sure. Right, for sure. And again, we're not done that yet. But yes, the main, if I was going to say what's actually happening in this chapter, besides the vision, it is the beginning of the departure of the divine presence from the temple. And that's, to Estelle's point, that's not a message per se. That's already just a consequence. That's the idea that exactly the Jewish people have for the time being done things that warrant God feeling like God is not welcome in the house that they built for God anymore. And God feels God has no choice but to leave. And we are seeing the beginning of that leaving. Graham and then Arnie.
Okay, I have a rhyme. Would you like to hear it?
Of course we would.
Yes.
Okay, let's see here. What I tried to do was combine well, you'll see. In piles of rubble, the ruins lie. The coals rain down, the missiles fly. In the parting clouds, where a light still gleams, there appears at the door in this house of our dreams a man clothed in linen in a world undone. And as the smoke clears, rebirth has begun.
My God. Graham, you are incredible. Wow.
A beautiful. I heard in it the attempt and the success in bridging the prophet's vision and what we're experiencing today, and certainly my hope and prayer is that it is a rebirth and somehow a pathway to peace. Certainly, I think God understands God's departure from the temple as a necessary consequence, but a departure in the prayer of returning. So that's certainly, it's always with cycles. Okay, it's going to be Arnie and Lance and then Carl.
So I have a couple of comments and a question. First of all, quick thing, Brian Wilson, the genius behind the Beach Boys, died last week, and he did all kinds of drugs, LSD primarily, to find who he was, and it basically ruined him and gave him mental health issues that stayed the rest of his life. And, much later on, he warned against taking drugs, but they did help him make genius music.
Mhm.
The other comment I wanted to make is, I remember reading a midrash. There's a statement in Exodus, I think chapter 22, that if a person kindles a fire and the fire goes out on its own, the person is still responsible for the damage caused by the fire. And in the midrash, the rabbis say that God said that he's accountable for the fire that he caused in Jerusalem. I thought that was like really touching. And my question is, this reminds me somewhat, even though it's kind of different at base, it reminds me somewhat of the visions that Daniel has.
Mm-hmm.
And the prevalent view in the Daniel visions, the ones that involve the four people and the different feet, different body parts made of different materials, is that it's four empires
Yes.
that will come against Israel.
Yes.
And here it doesn't relate like that. I'm just wondering, my question is, what's the difference that makes one seen one way and one not seen that way? Or is it?
Yeah. I haven't read all the midrash. It's a great question. I haven't read all the midrashic, material on this chapter. I think Daniel's visions, and I'm not. Rav Ezra has taught them, I believe, in
Yeah,
Hawaii,
that's
and
right.
wasn't privy to learn them with him. but my sense is that that it's much more clear in Ezekiel that it's a vision of God. In other words, what we're seeing is much more godly, and Daniel's visions are different in some way. But I think the rabbis, um, they're licensed to interpret based on what they see and the connections they want to make. So at some level, maybe they just didn't see it could come at it in at least two ways. One is maybe they just didn't see the textual hooks um, to link it to the four kingdoms. Obviously, there are the fours here, the four faces of the chariot, and of the four legs. But somehow it didn't spark the same association in them. It's one possibility. The other possibility, at least another possibility, is just contextually, again, the context of this vision and this moment, they didn't link it. But it's a beautiful question to sort of, when we look at what feel like similar enough visions that are not interpreted midrashically in the same ways, why might that be the case? I don't feel I even have enough material to give a compelling answer, but I'm delighted by the question.
It's interesting too that they're two of the three Babylonian books of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Continue your exploration of this question because it's fruitful. That's the best I can say.
So sometimes jokes are good and sometimes jokes are not.
Lance, go ahead.
The only thing I see in this vision is a rising lion.
The name of the current military mission against Iran. Okay.
By the world's greatest military force, whose exploits will be read forever in military study. This is the pagers was a precursor. And what's happened over the last 7 days is beyond imagination.
Well, it's a powerful association between the face of the lion here and the rising. While I believe the name of the mission gets its biblical source from Bilam's prophecies in Parshat Balak, Hen Am Kilavi Yakum, the nation will rise like a lion. Certainly there is an association here as well, literarily, of the rising lion on the chariot. So yes. Carl, go ahead.
Okay, what I have to say is sort of much more minor than some of the deep questions that have arisen before. But does anybody comment on the comparison you made between chapter 1 and this chapter? The ox. The ox is the only vision in that first chapter that's a kosher animal that could be used as a sacrifice in the temple. It's removed in the temple. Does anybody make any comment about that?
Yes.
Someone just did. It's a great comment. I don't know whether others have said it. I'm going to jot it down just in case I come across. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot written about it, and I've only picked up on a couple threads, so I'd be curious to see more. Yeah, great. Well, I think we've done a bit of justice to this chapter. I want to, just by way of ending, and again, I think we'll probably pick up with this again when we pick up with chapter 11. Maybe we'll review chapter 10 and then come to chapter 11 in the fall. But 1 year on Tisha B'Av night, we studied a passage from Eicha Rabbah, from the Midrash on Lamentations, and it talks about the divine presence traveled 10 journeys, from cherub to cherub, from cherub to the threshold, from the threshold of the sanctuary back to the cherubs, from the cherubs to the eastern gate, from the eastern gate to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the roof, from the roof to the altar, from the altar to the wall, from the wall to the city, and from the city to the Mount of Olives. And the lengthy Midrash goes through, quoting verse by verse, mostly from Ezekiel, the divine presence, God's presence, quoting from Ezekiel, quoting from Proverbs, quoting from Amos, from Micha, to kind of detail that journey, really inspired by our chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Ezekiel, in which we see explicitly some of the steps of that journey. You know, it's interesting. It never, in the 10, it never sort of, the divine presence never gets further from the Mount of Olives. You know, so somehow we imagine that God is, you know, if God had departed from the temple, God is still hovering nearby, you know, awaiting our repentance and return and the opportunity to come home. We certainly know many people are awaiting the opportunity to come home in a variety of ways. I'm always find it remarkable that the efforts of El Al to bring stranded Israelis back to Israel in a time like this, I've seen referred to as rescue missions. The idea that we consider it a rescue to go back home even when our home is under attack is a sign of our belief in and love for and commitment to Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael. And my prayers are always that the path we're on be a path that that lead us somehow to peace. It's hard to picture, but I can't give up on the hope that that's where we get, and the belief that that should be our guiding direction, even if it means going through war. So, yeah, Graham.
I've got a quick rhyme in response to Estelle. We prefer that God be not dark but bright, but our expectations fade into the night. Dreams and demands lead our minds astray. Our visions will fade, still God will stay. God's rising lion, the one path to choose, and only defeat for the ones who refuse.
Lance, I mean, I'm sorry, Graham. Yeah.
Yes, everyone's appreciative of your way with verse, and do if you have a moment to paste them in the chat before you sign off, please do. Then we can send them out to everyone as a little something to keep us strong over the summer. Again, stay tuned. There'll be plenty of summer learning opportunities. I'm grateful to everyone who comes in person, grateful to everyone who logs in on Zoom. This is always a highlight of the week to learn with each other and from each other, and to take it one chapter at a time as we go through our holy books. And wishing everyone a healthy, a safe, a peaceful, a comfortable summer. Looking forward to more opportunities to be together. Love to mom and dad as always. And
Thank you.
take care, everybody. Be well. Be well.
Yeah, there's some people in this class who are
Graham, feel free to pop it into the chat. I won't close the meeting until we get them. Thank you. Thank you.
Hope I didn't make any typos. Let's see. Oh, that's pretty good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.